Hey friends, welcome back to Driveness Healing Podcast. This is episode 71, and we are talking about a very fun topic. Carmen and I have a program that we just launched, the New Beginnings program, and we're in the beta launch, and we'll launch the full program later this summer. And this was one of the pieces of curriculum. And so I'm just laughing because I know the people in the program are going to be like, oh God, this again. Because nobody likes to talk about childhood wounds, right? We love to, as humans, have this, and even my brain does. I love having the thought that humans should not suffer and humans should not experience trauma. But I also know that Byron Katie says that when you argue with reality, you lose, but 100% of the time. And it is part of the human experience. It always has been, as long as there has been documentation of humans, that there has always been trauma within our story. All right. And we all have very different definitions of trauma. There's when I say trauma, all of us are going to have our own subjective interpretation of that word and what it means to us. So I just want us to be on the same page when I say trauma. Trauma does not, in my definition, mean worst case scenario. Where abduction, molestation, being beaten, being cussed out, being abandoned, right? That is not the only example of trauma. There's a spectrum of trauma. And I personally believe that none of us get out of this life without experiencing trauma. Because trauma, for one person and how their brain sees this event and makes it traumatic, another person could experience that event and it not be traumatic for them, right? It's a little bit of your subjective interpretation of reality and how your brain is interpreting these events that you're experiencing, right? So I'm talking to you, right? You, as a human being, I can guarantee have experienced some form of trauma throughout your life, right? And we all as children have wounds or trauma, no matter how amazing our parents are. Because here's the deal, our parents are humans. And humans aren't perfect, right? And I like to believe that parents do the best they can with what they're capable of and with what tools that they have. That belief for me serves me. Just to give people the benefit of the doubt and they are doing the best they can. And some people's best they can is very shitty, right? But some parents don't even try. Some parents are just doing the best they can and it's not good. And you come out of your childhood with some wounds, right? And some children see, I like to use the example because our brain, first and foremost, is always prioritizing the preservation of this species, right? This organism. My brain is always wanting to keep me safe. First and foremost, it is about survival. And everything else is going to be bonus. If I'm not safe, we don't get to focus on anything else. We have to focus on safety and survival first because that's how the brain is programmed. It's served us. It has brought humanity this far along so far. And in that, when we're children and our brain is developing and we don't have a lot of skills and we don't have a lot of perspective, right? We have very limited perspective on life. Our brain with oxytocin is wired to become dependent on our caretakers, right? Because we have to be. As a baby, I can't feed myself. I can't move myself. I can just lay here. And then as a toddler, I can't go hunt. I can't build shelter. I'm vulnerable to being killed and attacked because I can't defend myself, right? So of course our brain and as children is these caretakers are what help you survive, right? And so our brain's constantly looking at how do I ensure that I get to be a part of the tribe? Because we are so vulnerable as children, we do not want to be kicked out of the tribe. We will not survive. on our own in the wild, we won't survive. And so as we're looking at our caretakers, it really is wired into us to like try to please them, right? Like we want them, oxytocin, we're bonded. We want to, as humans, make other humans happy, right? But it's also critical for our survival. So I tell you that long intro because a lot of times our little Carmen brain, my little Kim brain, took events that as adults we would be like, that's really not a big deal. Like, that's not traumatic. That's not a big deal. But my brain interpreted it at that age as a big deal. So the example would be pretend that like 6-year-old Kim is having dinner with her family. I knock over my cup. Not a big deal. I knock it over again. My parents have had a long day at work. They're frustrated now. And then they snap at me. Like, seriously, Kim, pay attention. Like, what are you doing? Pull your head out of your ass, pay attention, right? And my little 6-year-old brain, that was scary because it felt to me, and this is just a story I'm making up, I assume that it felt to me like I've rocked the boat. Like I've disappointed them, right? Like I've done something wrong. They may not like me. This threatens my survival because they have to like and approve of me to keep me safe and keep me in the family. And then my brain makes a decision on what coping mechanism, what are we going to do to ensure that we will not ever be put in that situation again, right? And that's where these 5 either shields or coping mechanisms, whatever you want to call them, of childhood come out. And one of them is perfectionism. So in that story, my little brain decides, I see how angry my parents are, like, and I make a decision. I won't ever do that again. I'm never going to spill stuff. I'm always going to pay attention. I'm going to do things perfectly so I never disappoint them again. Because disappointment means possible rejection, possible unworthiness, not enoughness, or withdrawal of love. So if I just do everything perfect, then they will always love me. They will always accept me, and I will always get to be safe and sound in my little family system, right? Which is fine in childhood. That might like that probably helps some kids in family situations like survive. Except we take that coping mechanism and we bring it on into adulthood. And we use it as a coping mechanism into adulthood. And then society really helps us out by saying, that's a personality trait. Right?
Right.
That you have a perfectionist tendency because that's part of your personality. Well, guess what? That is super disempowering because perfectionism does not serve us. If you talk, are you a perfectionist, Carmen?
I would not.
No, I'm not either. If you talk to a perfectionist, they're going to have a lot of like how this is hinders their life, how it has kept them stuck because they can't do anything unless it's going to be perfect, right? It does not serve us. But to tell someone that it's a part of their personality implies like you can't change that. Like that is who you are. So then that tells me like that's my destiny. But when we pull that label off and say like this isn't your personality, because children, I've never met a 2-year-old that is a perfectionist.
Yeah.
It's something that evolves out of childhood, right? And so if that's true, then perfectionism is just a coping mechanism that you adopted as a child, that you said, this is how I stay safe. This is how I stay loved and accepted. And it became a belief system for you. And so now it's just a belief system. It's a coping mechanism, that perfectionistic quality. So there's 5 of these. Most of us have all of them. Some of them we just lean more heavily on. Okay. The other one, and I know this one's yours, is people pleasing, right? Like when we're little kids, same scenario, maybe Carmen like goes to throw her food in the trash, drops her plate, and it breaks, right? And she sees how upset her mom is. And that threatens us. So she's like, oh, here, I'll help clean this up. Right, mom, I'll get it. I'm so sorry. I didn't, like going into that people pleasing, not that that's people pleasing, but your brain said, if I can just do what people want to make them happy, then they'll be happy and then they'll love and accept me. Right. And then we get and bring that into adulthood. And then we people please our friends. We people please our bosses. We people please our significant others. Because in our mind, that's how we get love and acceptance. And if we're not people pleasing and if we're our authentic selves, they'll reject us. Do you have some stuff to say on that? I know that's one of your.
Yeah. I think, it's part of that, like, that survival mode is if you can foresee, right, like what somebody might want or need, and then you try to fill that void, in a sense, for that people pleasing, like, oh, I don't know, like getting people drinks without them, like asking for them, or like, oh, I suspect that when my partner comes home, they're going to be hungry. And so I want to, like with like trying to preemptively do something that you think that they would that would benefit them, right? You hope that they would appreciate it. That's why you're doing it, to get that appreciation, to have that, that feeling of security, acceptance and love, and and worthiness. But we take that in,
guys, like it's like an Achilles heel in saying no.
Yes. Yeah. It's hard to say no because you're afraid you're going to hurt somebody's feelings, right? Like if somebody asks you like to go,
like today, hey, I can't do 1 o'clock. We're supposed to do this at 1 o'clock. Like we got to do it at 2. Like I think your tendency, if 2 was like inconvenient for you, I think your tendency would want to be like, well, okay, I don't want to inconvenience you. Yeah, we'll do 2 o'clock.
Yeah. Because you think if somebody's asking the question, they're asking you a question because they are like leading you with the answer, right? And so if you have a conflicting answer, people who are people pleasing, sometimes that's really hard to say a conflicting answer, right? I mean, and it may be a yes or no, or it may be, I don't want to go to the mall, or I don't want to do something, right? But you have this like internal, I don't know, grief or something that's like, that we've adopted over time. It's like, oh, she wouldn't be asking me that if she didn't want to do something. So if I want to please my friends, okay, I'll go ahead and do this activity that I don't really want to do. But if it's going to keep our friendship, right? Like if it's going to not rock the boat, and if it's going to make, somebody, it's going to make my friend happy because they asked me to do it, then I'll, do it.
And I love how your brain, I'm not going to make this a coaching session, but I love how your brain has created all of that, the story around that, right? Yeah. Like she really wants to do this. It'll make my friend happy, blah, 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 right? And when it really is, the truth is I'm going to do it because I'm afraid if I say no, she won't like me anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what it boils down to. Yeah. And so, I think this definitely reiterates that. I mean, because you think of a child being put in that situation, right? Mm-hmm. Of like, oh yeah, I don't want to disappoint, right? We're in book club. We're about to read The Radical Awakening. And she talks about people pleasing and raising, especially in females, especially in girls, right? Being raised to be a good girl, right? Like you get that, like those attaboys and those not appraises, praise, right? Yeah.
Affirmation.
Yes, for like, I don't know, doing good things, right? Or things that adults around you approve of. Mm-hmm. So then, you're kind of chasing those in a sense, right? You're like, oh, I'm more accepted, I'm more loved if I do those things that I know, that they want or they appreciate. So then it turns into people pleasing.
Yep. Yeah. And I think it always boils down to a fear of like, if I say no or be myself, they'll reject me.
Exactly. Feel like you're not worthy. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is very interesting because my dad is not a people pleaser and I am not. Like, that's not, that was never a skill set I picked up. I was like, you don't like it, that's your problem, not mine. But here's the one that I just loved. It was my favorite, and it's anger.
Yeah.
So some of us in our childhood, like the wound, like for me, if I got in trouble, it embarrassed me, right? Because I had a little bit of like, I'm a perfectionist going on a little bit, right? I did not like being reprimanded. And I would get so angry. And my anger then would come out, like I would just take it within and like resentment and rebellion. And I'll stick it to you type thing. So you see a lot of teenagers like that.
Yeah.
And especially as children, we don't have a lot of choices. Or I didn't feel like as a kid that I had a lot of choices. I felt like a lot of people were telling me what to do and how to live my life a lot. So I didn't feel like I had any power. And so it just, or dad getting onto me and it embarrassing me, and I couldn't retaliate. I couldn't speak my side. I couldn't, you just like, you got onto it and you're supposed to learn your lesson. And you just, for me, it just made me angry. Right. And then that anger would be like, nobody can get onto me again. Nobody can embarrass me again. I'll keep everybody at arm's length. Right. So they can never get close to me. And I'll always be on the defense. You want to fight? I'm ready for a fight.
Yeah.
So anger is one of the ones too you see in kids. Drivenness is another one. And I want to clarify on this drivenness because I think there's a lot of us that are driven. And there's two different, or there's probably multiple, but right now there's two different energies I can think of that drive us. One of them is where this one refers to. And it's this prove myself. So the energy that's making, like, you see a lot of people like that maybe like came out of poverty and they're driven to be successful because they want to show the world I am something. I can make something out of myself. You said I couldn't do this and I'm going to do it. Right. Which is great. That gets a lot of stuff done, except it's a very like hot burning energy that burns out fast. Yeah. So when we're using this prove myself energy, like we can get stuff done, but it's not sustainable over the long haul. And that's where that coping mechanism comes out of, is like, I'll prove it to you. I'll prove you all wrong. Right. The other form of drivenness, I think, which comes out to be a little bit more healthier, is the energy of, I want to see what I'm capable of. I want to see what my potential is. I want to leave a legacy and impact. And that is not quite as hot burning, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. Because that it's kind of like, if you're looking to see like that challenge and what you're capable of, right, that would be like those folks who are like athletes, right, or like motivated. They go to piano lessons every day, right, because they want to be in an orchestra, or like they want to be at sort of like the top of their field and whatever their passion is, because they love it, right? Like, and they're like, oh, I want to see how far I can get.
Yes.
Or they have like role models or people in the top of that whatever field they're interested in. Yeah,
that gave me a perfect example. Like, I wanted to make I do want to make, but I used to want to make a lot of money, like millions of dollars. And it was fueled by, I want to prove myself. I'll prove to you guys that I can be successful. I'll prove to you that I can be something, right? Versus I'm very curious and I want to learn how to be like the best coach out there. And it doesn't come from this energy of like, I'll prove to you guys that I'm the best coach. It's like, I just love it and I'm curious about it and I want to maximize my potential. I don't care about what the others have to say, before the money was like all about what others had to say.
Yeah.
And then the last one is invisibility. It's just like kind of going into that playing small, like don't say, children need to be seen, not heard.
Yeah.
Right. And like, if they don't see me, they won't get on to me. I won't get in trouble. I'll just like quietly hide over here and play very quietly. Like just, I hope nobody sees me. Nobody acknowledges me.
Right.
And that is one of those coping mechanisms, right? They probably got in trouble. This is definitely not one of mine. And like, well, if I just stay out of the way, then I'll never get in trouble again.
Yeah. Or that invisibility, like the same thing with sort of that positive reinforcement, right? Like, so when I was little, I grew up in a Catholic church, right? At that time, you bring kids to church, right? But you didn't talk in church. You sat quietly. I don't care if you had to pee or if you were hungry. You sat in the pew and you sat quietly, right? And then at the end of the service, right, people would be so impressed that a child sat through service without disruptions or crying, right, or like needing something. So then you get that positive reinforcement. Hey, I was good because I just sat there invisible, right? Like that was my job, if you will. And so then it perpetuates the cycle, because then you realize, okay, yeah, this is what's going to get me that approval, right? This is what's going to get me that positive attention, is if I just keep my mouth quiet and sit here. Yeah.
We would have been two very different children in church.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Like, and I'd have been over there like fuming, eye rolling like crazy.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely changed, right? But that's the way it was. Yeah. We did get a pastor or a priest who would like encourage people to bring their kids and their babies in, because people wouldn't bring babies to church.
Yeah.
I mean, they had a crying room in the back. And I mean, I'm sure, I don't know if there's other churches that have crying rooms or if that's just a Catholic thing.
I grew up Southern Baptist. We didn't have a crying room.
Yeah, there's a crying room in the back. So if you have a child that's, smaller crying, you took that child to the back. And so it didn't disrupt the service. Yeah. And so it was just, I don't know, the culture at the time.
Right.
So yeah, I also learned that.
Young. Yeah. So I just wanted to like bring this up to you guys so that you guys could be aware, like these are coping mechanisms, not personality traits. And the way to check it is to look at I love the idea of like a 2 or 3 year old, because they have not been programmed enough to like start demonstrating how we're supposed to behave in society, right? Like they just are like 100% them and they don't care. But if you look at a 2-year-old, like this stuff isn't going on.
Yeah.
They're in their own world. Like they want to make you happy, like in the sense of like they'll smile at you, right? And they'll do kind of what you tell them to do, but it's not driven of like out of that people pleasing manipulation. I want you to like me. And so like, okay, I have to do this. You told me to do this, or,
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, they're your coping mechanisms. They are not serving you. These were meant for childhood. We were supposed to leave them in childhood, but most of us carry them into adulthood and we're functioning out of them in adulthood. And they are not helping us get where we want to go. They're making us suffer, actually. So.
I love that you distinguish that these are coping mechanisms and not personality traits. Because I think that when we have have an understanding of these coping mechanisms, sometimes they become part of our identity as adulthood, in adults. And then, to be able to separate those and say, okay, this served me when I was, 5 or 6 or 7, but it's not working now, and I can let that go and get to choose my coping mechanisms now. Yeah. And they're not deep rooted, seated personality traits that I can't change.
Right.
I've accepted, right? Because they've shaped our worldview, but not permanent.
Yeah. Brooke Castillo, one of my coaches, talks about like emotional adulthood versus emotional childhood.
Oh.
And that we can be, and as an adult, we go in and out of them when we're not really conscious. And also, I will add to that, like when an event has a trauma response for me, it happens so quickly because it's a trauma response. I can't think through this. I will go into emotional childhood instantly. So I will instantly revert back to this anger, kind of like prove myself, anger mainly. I go into anger very quickly because my brain is wired, right? Like that's a very familiar pathway. It says we're being threatened and it pulls me into that emotional childhood of anger. And then I start acting out of emotional childhood. And so if you can look at your patterns, for me, my pattern is like control. So I'm working on a belief system that I am the locus of control, that no one else can control me. But my brain had been programmed that other people control me. So when I have other humans trying to control me, it pulls me into that emotional childhood, back to that little girl who feels very angry for being controlled. And I don't say anything. I don't stick up for myself because I'm back in that childhood brain. And so I just take it. I won't say anything because if I said something to my parents like that, you would have got a busting, right? So I don't say anything. I just take it, even as a 40-year-old. And then I start resenting you. And in that resentment, I will eventually retaliate. I'll humiliate you, is my pattern, is how I coped. And so I can see that now in an adult when I'm in that pattern, like, oh, I'm in emotional childhood. Yeah. That's what's going on. And like sometimes I can't stop it until it's out over, right? But at least I'm aware of it now. And that's not like, well, this is just who I am and how I deal with things. It's like, oh, this event pulled me into emotional childhood. Emotional adulthood is how I want to show up, and know like you can try to say what you want, but I'm in control of me, and I'm going to choose to do that or not do that. Yeah. Anything else?
I don't think so.
All right, friends. There is your childhood wound coping mechanisms lesson for the week. Enjoy. Please let us know anytime. If you have any questions about this stuff or you have any thoughts, you can always comment or email us at thriveandalignhealing@gmail.com. We always appreciate you guys listening. Thank you. And I want you guys to be able to start emailing us questions, so we can start talking about topics that you guys are interested in and want to hear from us. So if you have a topic you're dying for us to talk about, email it to thriveandalignhealing@gmail.com. All right. See you guys later.